All right, so let's talk wilderness hygiene.
Okay.
We've got a whole stack of research here about how to stay clean when you're miles from civilization.
Yeah, it's funny. We think so much about food, water, shelter.
The big three.
But hygiene can be just as important, especially if you're out there for a while.
It's not just about comfort either, right?
Yeah.
There are some serious health and safety reasons to think about staying clean.
Absolutely. So where do we start?
Well, all our research says hand sanitizer is absolutely essential.
Makes sense. It's your first defense against germs. Especially when you're dealing with less than ideal bathroom situations.
Yeah, let's be real for a second. We're talking about potential exposure to fecal matter.
Right. Not a pleasant thought, but important to consider.
And it's not just about after you go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
It's also about food prep, treating wounds, anything where you need really clean hands.
Good point. Now, what about soap?
That seems to be where the debate starts. Some sources say biodegradable soap is a must-have. Others say avoid soap altogether near water sources.
Yeah, it's tricky. Biodegradable soap is definitely better than regular soap, but it's not a free pass to pollute.
So what's the rule?
200 feet. You should always wash and rinse at least 200 feet away from any water source.
Okay, so we're not contaminating the water we might need later.
Exactly. And speaking of biodegradable soap, Dr. Bronner's is really popular. It's concentrated, so a little goes a long way, and you can use it for everything.
Like what?
Washing your dishes, even your clothes if you need to.
Oh, wow. That's pretty versatile. I've used it at home, but I wasn't sure how well it works in the wilderness.
Works great. Just be careful about the scent. You don't want to be attracting any unwanted visitors.
Right. Strong scents can be like a dinner bell for animals. What about toothpaste?
You'll definitely want a travel-sized toothbrush and toothpaste. But there's a trick to make your toothpaste last longer.
A trick?
Yeah, it's called the Eco Spray. Have you heard of it?
No. What is that?
Okay, so instead of a big glob of toothpaste on your brush, you just put a tiny dab, and then you use a spray bottle filled with water to mist your mouth as you brush.
Oh, interesting. So you're using the water to spread the toothpaste around?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a great way to conserve and reduce waste.
That's awesome. I'm totally trying that. Okay, so we've covered hand sanitizer, soap, toothpaste.
Yeah.
What about keeping the rest of our bodies clean?
A washcloth or bandana is a must-have. It dries fast, and you can use it for everything.
Multi-purpose. I like it. Some people use those reusable washcloths too, the pack-and wipes.
Yeah, those are great. A good alternative to disposable wipes.
Right, those should always be packed out no matter what.
Absolutely. And speaking of wipes, unscented moist towelettes can be really helpful, especially in dry environments where water is scarce.
Okay, good to know. Let's talk about the bathroom situation.
Right, how to go when you're in the wilderness. For toilet paper, you can pack a partially used roll from home, just flatten it to save space, and double bag it in Ziploc bags to keep it dry.
Smart. If you're feeling really adventurous, you can go the natural route.
Yeah, leave snow, smooth stones. It's an option.
Just make sure you choose carefully and dispose of everything properly.
Absolutely.
So we've got hand sanitizer, soap, toothpaste, washcloths, toilet paper.
Yeah.
What about feminine hygiene?
That's another important consideration. Menstrual cups, like the Diva cup, are great for minimizing waste, but you have to dispose of them properly.
So bury the contents and pack out the cup.
Exactly. Leave no trace.
Now I have to ask about this pee rag method I've heard about. It sounds a little intense.
It's actually pretty simple and effective. You use a dedicated bandana, usually darker colors are better, and you just clip it to the outside of your pack. Let the sun do its thing.
The sun.
Yeah, the UV rays from the sun will disinfect the cloth.
Wow, so it's like natural sterilization. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But you probably don't want to use any harsh detergents on that bandana, right?
Nope. You want the UV rays to be able to do their job.
Okay, so we've got all the must-haves. Now what about the things we can leave at home? The stuff we don't need to weigh ourselves down with?
Definitely ditch the deodorant. First of all, it attracts animals. And second, it's just extra weight.
So embrace the natural musk.
Exactly. It's all part of the experience.
I'm not sure I'm ready to give up deodorant entirely, but I guess when in Rome, right?
Pretty much. And chances are everyone else out there is skipping the deodorant too.
That makes me feel a little better. What about shampoo?
Even biodegradable shampoo can be harmful to ecosystems, so it's best to avoid it.
So if we're out there for a while and don't want to end up with completely unmanageable hair, what are our options?
Well, for shorter trips, it's no big deal. You can just embrace the wild hair look. But for longer trips, you'll want to do something to avoid clogged follicles and yeast overgrowth.
Yeast overgrowth. That sounds unpleasant.
Yeah, not fun. If water is plentiful, you can use a collapsible bucket to carry some water away from the source and just rinse your hair. You can use a little biodegradable soap if you need to, but just focus on rinsing away the dirt and sweat.
Okay, so we're basically washing our hair without actually washing it.
Pretty much. You can also use solid shampoo bars if you're going to be out there for a while.
Like those Ithic bars. I've heard good things about them.
Yeah, they're great. And they're packaged in compostable materials, so they're good for the environment.
Bonus points for sustainability. What about dry shampoo? That seems like it would be perfect for the wilderness.
It is. It's amazing how well dry shampoo works to absorb oil and dirt, even when you're miles from civilization.
I'm a big fan of dry shampoo.
Yeah.
I'll have to remember to pack some for my next camping trip. Speaking of washing hot, what about clothes? How do we keep our clothes clean on the trail?
Choosing quick-drying clothes is essential. Things like ex officio underwear and Nike Dry Fit shirts and shorts.
Okay, so avoid cotton.
Yeah, for the most part. But what about when a quick rinse isn't enough? What if your clothes really need a wash?
Good question. What do you recommend?
You can actually get your clothes pretty clean using just a gallon-sized Ziploc bag, some biodegradable soap, and a little water.
Really?
Yeah, you just put everything in the bag, seal it up, and squish and agitate for a few minutes, then rinse and hang to dry.
That's amazing. Like a mini washing machine in a bag.
Eh.
I've also seen those Scrubbo wash bags.
Yeah, those are great too. They're basically portable washboards.
We can ditch the laundromat and head for the hills.
Exactly. It's all about getting creative with what you have.
I love it.
Yeah.
Speaking of getting creative, this is the part I'm really excited about. What about natural alternatives? Can we really find everything we need to stay clean in nature?
You might be surprised by just how much nature has to offer. For soap, there are a number of plants that can be used.
Soapwort, for example.
Soapwort, never heard of it.
It's a wild flower that makes a lathery sap when you crush it and mix it with water.
Wow, so you can literally find soap growing in the wild. What if you're in a drier environment like the desert?
Then you need yucca root. It contains saponins, which make a soapy lather when mixed with water.
Okay, those are seriously impressive. What other natural soap options are there?
Soapberry is another good one. It grows in wet climates, and you can boil the berries down into a liquid soap or grind them into a powder.
Wow. Nature is amazing. And for those who are feeling really adventurous, there's always the option of making soap from animal fat and ash.
That's the OG method. It sounds like something straight out of a pioneer's handbook.
It is. It involves rendering the fat and creating lye from hardwood ashes. Then you combine them and cook them together until they turn into soap.
I'm starting to think I could survive anything with these natural hygiene hacks. How about oral hygiene?
There are natural options for that, too. Willow bark tea makes a great mouthwash.
Really? How does that work?
Willow bark contains salicylic acid, which is a natural anti-inflammatory and antiseptic.
So it's like nature's aspirin.
Exactly. And pine needle tea can help freshen your breath.
I've heard that pine needles are also high in vitamin C, right?
Yeah, and they have antimicrobial properties, which can help neutralize odor-causing bacteria.
Cool. So we've got soap, mouthwash, breath freshener. What about the other essentials?
Believe it or not, nature has us covered there too. Certain fibers and strings can be used as floss, and there are all sorts of leaves that can serve as natural toilet paper.
Like what?
Mullein is a good one. It's soft and absorbent. People call it cowboy toilet paper.
Cowboy toilet paper. I love it. What else?
Woolly lamb's ear is another option. The leaves are really soft and fuzzy, and they can also be used as wound dressings.
That's handy.
Yeah.
And then there's big leaf aster, which I guess is also known as lumberjack toilet paper.
You got it.
Wow, nature really does provide. It's incredible to think that we can find everything we need to stay clean and hygienic right in the wilderness.
It is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And it really shows how resourceful humans can be.
Totally.
Yeah.
But some of these natural solutions, like making soap from scratch, seem a little intimidating.
They can be, but that's part of the beauty of wilderness hygiene. It pushes us to step outside our comfort zones and learn new skills.
And it reminds us that we're capable of so much more than we think.
Exactly.
So we've talked about packing the essentials, ditching the luxuries, embracing leave no trace principles. What other important things should we keep in mind when it comes to wilderness hygiene?
Don't try to be as clean as you are at home.
What do you mean?
I mean, don't stress about being perfectly clean all the time. It's okay to get a little dirty. Embrace the simplicity of it all.
Good point. It's supposed to be an adventure, not a spa day.
Exactly. And remember, it's not just about you. It's about respecting the environment and minimizing your impact.
Right. Even something like using natural toilet paper can have different impacts depending on the environment.
That's true. Do your research and understand the specific guidelines for the area you're visiting.
And if you're not comfortable with a certain method or you're not sure about the proper technique, it's always best to err on the side of caution.
Absolutely no shame in packing out your waste or using a more conventional method if it means minimizing your impact.
Wilderness hygiene is all about finding that balance between preparedness, resourcefulness, and respect for nature.
I think that's a great way to put it.
So before we move on, I'd like to talk more about those long-term health implications of neglecting hygiene in the wilderness. We touched on it earlier, but I think it's worth diving a little deeper.
Yeah, that's an important topic.
Okay, so you mentioned clogged follicles and yeast overgrowth. What other problems can happen if we're not careful?
Skin infections are a big one. You're constantly exposed to the element's sweat, dirt, bacteria. It's the perfect recipe for an infection.
So even small cuts and scrapes can become a problem.
Exactly. And those infections can spread quickly, especially if you're not washing your hands and keeping your gear clean.
That's a little scary. What about more serious infections?
Those can happen too. Giardia, for example.
Giardia?
Yeah, it's a parasite that can cause really bad diarrhea cramps, dehydration. You can get it from contaminated water sources.
Yikes. So even if we're being careful about our own hygiene, we can still be exposed to things through water or contact with other people. What about other long-term health risks?
Well, even those biodegradable products can contain harsh chemicals.
Like the fragrances and preservatives in some soaps and shampoos.
Exactly. If you're exposed to those chemicals for a long time, it can cause problems.
Boy.
Skin irritation, allergies, even hormonal disruptions.
Wow. So wilderness hygiene isn't just about staying clean and comfortable. It's about protecting our health in the long run.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's about understanding that our choices can have a real impact on the environment.
Okay, so for anyone listening who's new to wilderness hygiene and it might be feeling a little overwhelmed, what's the most important thing to remember?
Be curious. Be willing to learn. Don't be afraid to try different things and find what works best for you and the environment.
It's a journey, not a destination.
Exactly. We're all constantly learning and adapting.
Now, before we wrap up this part of our conversation, I'm really intrigued by that method for making soap from animal fat and ash. Can we break that?
Now we combine them. In a separate pot, carefully mix 2 parts fat with 1 part lye. Always add the lye to the fat, not the other way around.
Okay, so we're mixing things up carefully. What then?
Now we cook. Heat the mixture slowly over low heat and stir constantly. You're going to cook it until it reaches a pudding-like consistency.
So we're literally cooking soap.
Yep. It's called saponification.
That's a cool word. How long does that take?
It depends, but it could be anywhere from 30 minutes to a couple of hours.
Okay, so patience is key.
Mm-hmm.
What do we do with our soap pudding once it's ready?
Pour it into molds or a container lined with parchment paper. Let it cool and harden.
So we're making soap bars.
That's right. Once it's hardened, you can cut it into bars or just scoop it out of the container.
And then we're ready to ladder up.
Not quite yet. There's one more step. Curing.
Curing? What's that?
It allows the excess water to evaporate and the soap to harden properly. It also helps the pH of the soap to neutralize so it's gentler on your skin.
So it's like aging cheese.
Kind of. You want to cure your soap for at least 4 weeks. Some people cure it for even longer.
Wow. That takes dedication.
Yeah.
But I can imagine it's pretty satisfying to use soap that you made yourself.
It is. It's a skill that's been passed down for generations.
I love that. We've gone from hand sanitizer and biodegradable soap to crafting soap from scratch. It's amazing how many options we have for wilderness hygiene.
It is. And it's a good reminder that we can adapt and find solutions using what nature provides.
Okay, so before we wrap up this fascinating conversation about wilderness hygiene, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about. We've talked about using natural alternatives in the wilderness, but what if we brought that thinking into our everyday lives?
I like that. What do you have in mind?
Well, we've seen how effective things like willow bark tea and pine needle tea can be. And those chewing sticks sound pretty cool. Could we incorporate more of these natural solutions into our daily routines even when we're not out in the wilderness?
I don't see why not. There's something to be said for simple, sustainable solutions.
Right. And it makes you wonder what other everyday items we could replace with natural alternatives. What impact would that have on our health and the environment?
It's definitely something to think about. It's a bigger conversation about sustainability and reconnecting with nature.
I completely agree. It's like the wilderness is teaching us lessons that we can apply to our lives in so many ways.
I think you're right. It all comes back to that interconnectedness. Our health, our choices, and the health of the planet are all tied together.
Well said. So to everyone listening, as you head out on your next adventure, whether it's a backpacking trip, a camping weekend, or just a walk in the park, remember that staying clean is about more than just appearances.
It's about taking care of yourself and respecting nature.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe these wilderness hygiene hacks will inspire you to make some changes in your everyday life.
It's amazing how much we can learn from nature.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
My pleasure. And for women, there's the whole issue of menstrual hygiene.
Right, that adds another layer of complexity.
Definitely menstrual cups are a good option for minimizing waste.
Like the Diva Cup.
Yeah, that's a popular one. But again, it's really important to dispose of everything properly.
So we're burying the contents and packing out the cup itself.
Exactly. We're always thinking about leave no trace.
Now, I've heard about this P-rag method, but I have to admit, I'm not entirely sure how it works.
Okay, so it might sound a little strange, but it's actually pretty clever. You basically designate a bandana specifically for peeing.
A dedicated bandana.
Yeah. Usually a darker color is better.
Yeah.
And you just clip it to the outside of your pack. Let the sun do its thing.
So the sun's UV rays are disinfecting the cloth.
Exactly. Pretty neat, huh?
That's really interesting. It's amazing how many creative solutions there are for wilderness hygiene. Okay, so we've talked about all the essentials. Now what about the stuff we can leave at home?
Yeah, what can we ditch to save space and weight?
Exactly. What's at the top of your list?
Deodorant is a big one. It's basically just attracting animals.
And it's extra weight.
Right. So ditch it. Embrace the natural musk.
I'm not sure how I feel about that. But I guess it's all part of the experience.
It is. And honestly, you get used to it pretty quickly. Plus, everyone else is probably doing the same thing.
Okay, that makes me feel a little better. What about shampoo? Is that a wilderness?
No. Even biodegradable shampoo can be harmful to the environment. So it's best to avoid using it in or near water sources.
So what do we do if we're out there for a while and don't want to end up with a bird's nest on our heads?
For short trips, it's really not a big deal. Just let your hair do its thing. But for longer trips, you might want to take some precautions to avoid clogged follicles and yeast overgrowth.
Oh, yeah, we talked about that earlier. Not something I want to experience.
Right. So what can you do? If water is plentiful, you can use a collapsible bucket to carry some water away from the source and just rinse your hair. You can use a little bit of biodegradable soap if you really need to, but the main goal is just to rinse away the dirt and sweat.
Got it. So we're basically washing our hair without washing it.
Pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
And there are also solid shampoo bars, which are good for longer trips.
Oh, like those ethic bars. They seem to be really popular.
They are. And they're good for the environment, too.
What about dry shampoo? That seems like it would be perfect for the wilderness.
It is. Dry shampoo is surprisingly effective at absorbing oil and dirt. You'd be amazed.
I use it all the time at home.
Yeah.
I'll have to remember to pack some for my next camping trip. Speaking of washing, what about clothes?
Yes. The laundry situation. Choosing quick-drying clothes is key. Things like ex officio underwear.
And Nike Dry Fit.
Exactly. They dry super fast and help prevent that hiker funk. But what about when those clothes need a real wash?
Yeah. What's the best way to do laundry in the backcountry?
A quick dip in a lake or river can often do the trick.
But no sunscreen or bug spray before we go swimming, right?
Right. We don't want to pollute the water. But what if a quick rinse isn't enough?
What if we need a deeper clean?
Believe it or not, you can get your clothes surprisingly clean using just a gallon-sized Ziploc bag, some biodegradable soap, and a little water.
Wait, really?
Seriously. It's like a mini washing machine.
Yeah.
You just put everything in the bag, seal it up, and squish and agitate it for a few minutes, then rinse and hang to dry.
That's awesome. I'm definitely trying that. There are also those scrubble wash bags, which are basically portable washboards.
Yeah, those are great too. If you're going to be doing a lot of backcountry travel, they're worth the investment. But the Ziploc method works really well in a pinch.
So many options. It's all about getting creative and resourceful.
Exactly. Now, speaking of resourcefulness, let's talk about natural alternatives.
This is the part I've been waiting for. Can nature really provide everything we need to stay clean?
You might be surprised. So for soap, there are actually a lot of plants you can use. Soapwort, for example.
Soapwort? What's that?
It's a wildflower that produces this lathery sap when you crush it and mix it with water.
Wow. So we can literally find soap growing in the wild. What about if we're in a drier environment like the desert?
Yucca root is your friend in the desert. It's got these things called saponins, which make a soapy lather when agitated in water.
Okay, so we've got soapwort for wet climates, yucca root for dry climates. What else?
Soapberry is another good one. You find it in wetter climates, and you can boil the berries down into a liquid soap or grind them into a powder.
Amazing. And then there's the classic method of making soap from animal fat and ash.
Ah, yes, the pioneer way.
It sounds so intense.
It's actually not that complicated. You render the fat to get pure fat, then you make lye by leaching water through hardwood ashes, and then you combine the fat and lye and cook them together until they turn into soap.
Wow, it's like a chemistry experiment.
It kind of is. It's a fascinating process. I think it really shows how resourceful humans can be.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've got natural soap. What about oral hygiene? Are there natural alternatives for toothpaste and mouthwash?
You bet. Willow bark tea makes a great mouthwash.
Willow bark tea. Really?
Yeah, willow bark contains salicylic acid, which is a natural anti-inflammatory and antiseptic.
So it's like nature's aspirin.
Exactly. And for fresh breath, you can try pine needle tea.
Pine needles are good for so many things. They're high in vitamin C too, right?
That's right. And they have antimicrobial properties, which can help get rid of odor-causing bacteria.
So we've got soap, mouthwash, breath freshener. What about floss and toilet paper?
Nature's got us covered there, too.
Yeah.
You can use certain fibers or strings as floss, and there are all sorts of leaves that can work as toilet paper.
For real? Like what kind of leaves?
Well, there's mullein, which has these soft, absorbent leaves. People call it cowboy toilet paper.
Cowboy toilet paper. That's hilarious.
Okay.
What else?
Woolly lamb's ear is another good option. The leaves are really soft and fuzzy, and they can also be used as wound dressings.
That's pretty versatile.
Yeah.
And then there's big leaf aster, which is sometimes called lumberjack toilet paper.
It's amazing what you can find in nature.
It really is. It's like a whole pharmacy and grocery store just waiting to be discovered.
I know, it's pretty inspiring. It makes you realize that we don't always need all those fancy products and gadgets.
We can learn to live more simply and sustainably.
Exactly.
But I have to say, some of these natural solutions, like making soap from animal fat and ash, seem a little intimidating.
I get it. It's definitely outside most people's comfort zones. But that's part of what makes wilderness hygiene so interesting. It pushes us to try new things and learn new skills.
And it reminds us that we're more capable than we think.
Exactly. We have this innate ability to adapt and problem solve. It's in our DNA.
So besides packing the essentials, ditching the unnecessary luxuries, and following leave no trace principles, what are some other key things to keep in mind when it comes to wilderness hygiene?
Don't get too hung up on being perfectly clean. It's okay to get a little dirty.
Embrace the dirt.
Exactly. It's part of the experience. Remember, you're in the wilderness, not a 5-star hotel.
And it's not just about us, right? We have to think about the impact we're having on the environment.
Absolutely. Even seemingly small things like using natural toilet paper can have different impacts depending on the environment.
So do your research and know the guidelines for the area you're visiting.
Exactly. And if you're not sure about something, it's always best to err on the side of caution.
If in doubt, pack it out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's no shame in that. It's better to be safe than sorry.
Wilderness hygiene is all about finding that balance between being prepared, being resourceful, and being respectful of nature.
I think that sums it up perfectly.
So before we move on to our final thoughts, I want to talk a little bit more about the potential health risks of neglecting hygiene in the wilderness.
Yeah, we touched on this earlier, but I think it's worth exploring a bit further.
You mentioned clogged follicles and yeast overgrowth.
Yeah.
What are some other things that can happen if we're not careful about hygiene?
Skin infections are a big concern. When you're out in the wilderness, you're exposed to all sorts of things. Dirt, sweat, bacteria. It's easy for a small cut or scrape to get infected.
Those infections can spread quickly.
They can, especially if you're not washing your hands regularly and keeping your gear clean.
That's good to keep in mind. What about more serious infections?
Those are possible too. Giardia is one example.
What's Giardia?
It's a parasite that can cause severe diarrhea cramps, dehydration. It's often spread through contaminated water sources. That sounds awful. So even if we're being careful about our own hygiene, we could still be exposed to things through the water or from other people.
That's true. You can't control everything, but you can definitely minimize your risk by following good hygiene practices.
What about long-term health risks? Are there any we should be aware of?
Well, even some of those biodegradable products can contain harsh chemicals, things like fragrances and preservatives.
So we need to be careful about what we're using, even if it claims to be natural.
Exactly. It's always a good idea to read the labels and do your research.
Especially if you have sensitive skin.
Right. And it's worth thinking about the cumulative effects of those chemicals over time.
So wilderness hygiene isn't just about staying clean and comfortable. It's about protecting our health in the long run.
Absolutely. And it's about being mindful of the impact our choices have on the environment.
Okay, so for anyone listening who's new to all of this, what's the most important takeaway?
Don't be afraid to experiment. Find what works for you and the environment you're in. And most importantly, have fun. Wilderness hygiene shouldn't feel like a chore.
It shouldn't. It's all about learning and adapting and finding creative solutions.
I love that. Now, before we move on to our final thoughts for this episode,
Yeah.
I'm really curious about that method for making soap from animal fat and ash.
Oh, yeah. You want to hear more about that?
Yeah, can we break it down step by step?
Sure. So the first step is to render the fat.
Render.
Yeah, you basically melt the fat down slowly over low heat and then strain it to remove any solids.
So we're purifying the fat.
Exactly. And then you need to make lye.
How do we do that?
You leach water through hardwood ashes. It's basically like making a strong tea with the ashes.
A tea with ashes.
Yeah. But this tea is called lye, and it's a key ingredient for soap making.
Okay, so we've got our pure fat and our lye. Now what?
Now we mix them together carefully in a separate pot. 2 parts fat to 1 part lye. And always add the lye to the fat, not the other way around.
Safety first. What happens next?
Now we cook the mixture, slowly over low heat, stirring constantly. It takes a while, but eventually the mixture will start to thicken and turn into soap.
How long does that take?
It can take anywhere from 30 minutes to a couple of hours. It depends on the type of fat and the strength of your lye solution.
So patience is key.
It is. Once the mixture reaches a pudding-like consistency, you pour it into molds or a container lined with parchment paper. Then you let it cool and harden.
So we're making soap bars from scratch.
That's right. Once the soap is hard, you can cut it into bars or just scoop it out of the container.
And then we can finally use it.
Not so fast. There's one more step, curing.
What's curing?
It's basically letting the soap sit for a few weeks. This allows any excess water to evaporate and the soap to harden properly. It also allows the pH to neutralize so it's not too harsh on your skin.
So we're basically aging the soap.
Exactly. The longer you cure it, the better it will be.
So we need to be patient.
Patience is definitely a virtue when it comes to soap making.
Right.
But it's worth it in the end.
I bet it feels amazing to use soap that you made yourself from scratch.
It does. It's a real sense of accomplishment.
It's like we're connecting with our ancestors who had to rely on their own skills and resourcefulness.
Exactly. It's a reminder that we're capable of so much more than we often realize.
I love that. We've gone from hand sanitizer and biodegradable soap to crafting our own soap from nature. It's amazing how much we can learn from the wilderness.
It is. It's like a whole different world out there with its own set of rules and possibilities.
And it's a world that we can all learn from and benefit from.
I couldn't agree more.
So before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about. We've been talking about using natural alternatives in the wilderness. But what if we brought that same thinking into our everyday lives?
I love that idea.
We've seen how effective things like willow bark tea and pine needle tea can be, and those chewing sticks sound pretty cool. What if we incorporated more of these natural solutions into our daily routines, even when we're not out in the woods?
I think it's a great way to simplify our lives and reduce our impact on the environment.
And it's a good reminder that nature provides for us in so many ways.
It makes you wonder what other everyday items we could replace with natural alternatives. What if we all started thinking a little bit more like wilderness adventurers?
What kind of changes could we make?
Yeah.
What kind of impact could we have?
It's an exciting thought, isn't it?
It is. It's like the wilderness is holding up a mirror to our modern lives and challenging us to think differently.
And to live differently.
Exactly. So to everyone listening, as you go about your day, take a moment to appreciate the natural world around you. And think about how you can incorporate a little bit of that wilderness wisdom into your life.
It's a journey we can all take together.
You know, it's amazing how much this conversation about wilderness hygiene has made me think about like bigger picture stuff.
I know what you mean. It's not just about staying clean in the woods. It's about like rethinking our relationship with nature and cleanliness in general.
Right, like when you're out in the wilderness, you realize how much we take for granted at home. Like running water, endless supplies of everything.
Totally. You have to be way more resourceful and mindful of your impact.
And it makes you question some of those like societal norms that we just accept without thinking. Like the idea that we need to be constantly sanitized and deodorized.
Yeah, it's like we're afraid of getting a little dirty, but being in nature is all about getting a little dirty.
And like we were talking about before, all those harsh chemicals in our everyday products, even the ones that claim to be natural, they could actually be harmful in the long run.
It's true. We need to find that balance between staying clean and respecting our bodies and the environment.
It makes me think about those ancient cultures that lived in close harmony with nature.
Yeah.
You know, using plants and natural resources for everything.
Yeah, there's definitely a wisdom there that we've lost touch with in modern society.
Like we've become so disconnected from the natural world.
It's a shame because nature has so much to offer us.
like willow bark tea for mouthwash or making our own soap from scratch. It sounds daunting, but it's also kind of empowering.
It is. It's like we're reclaiming those ancient skills and traditions.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into wilderness hygiene, what's the one thing you hope our listeners will take away from this conversation?
I'd say approach wilderness hygiene with a sense of curiosity and a willingness to learn. Don't be afraid to try new things and see what works best for you.
And remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about finding that balance between preparedness, resourcefulness, and respect for nature.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe those wilderness hygiene hacks will inspire you to make some changes in your everyday life, too.
Maybe we can all bring a little bit of that wilderness mindset back home with us.
I think that would be amazing. Thanks for joining us on this journey.
It's been a pleasure chatting with you. And to all our listeners out there, stay clean, stay safe, and stay wild.